Chapter 10 really sets up everything that comes in 11 and 12. So we're going to have one more vision, and this chapter really is given over to introducing that. So in chapter 10, we have this introduction. It's kind of going to talk about the nature of what is about to happen. And then in chapters 11, and actually some would include chapter 11, verse 1 in the introduction part of it, but certainly through chapter 11, verses 2 through 12:4, we have these visions. It's divided up into two major sections. We have first in 11:2 through 35, the immediate future for Darius, up to the Greek ruler Antiochus. And then the second part of that in 11:36 through 12:4 kind of deals with the far future and end times. And I think we really are talking about the true end times when we get to that portion of it. And then the final message is given to Daniel in the last part of chapter 12. So all of this constitutes really kind of one connected sort of thing. So as we've had Daniel, we talked about his nature and his character. Daniel is a prophet because he's been able to see into the future. But he's not the prophet that we typically think of. It's the prophet that our model would come from, like Elijah and Elisha, where they were receiving the word or the message from God, and they were going in to before the king, typically before the rulers, with other people, and declaring this message of God. And oftentimes it was a message of repentance, of turning back to God, of changing their ways, and making them, turn away from idols typically and turn back to God. And Daniel's not that type of prophet. He receives these messages, but he doesn't really go preach about these things. But I think what we find in chapter 10 is that God is using these messages through Daniel to try to touch the hearts and the minds of the people that he's around. So this is our traditional prophet. We just don't see that in the message of the writing. It's not that Daniel is doing that, but I think we get a clue to that in chapter 10, that Daniel is going in and talking to these kings and these leaders and using his influence to be able to change their character so that they act differently. So in the military, the role of a chaplain is to be a religious leader, right? We are the one person who wears a religious symbol on our uniform. We're designated as that when I'm out amongst the soldiers. And I have rank, and so I wear that rank on my uniform, but I have no command authority. I can because you're going to do it because you see the rank. I can tell a soldier to go do something, but they're not, I'm not their commander. I'm not their overseeing officer, except for my assistant. He is directly responsible to me. He better listen to what I tell him to. But in general, I don't have any authority to issue orders, so to speak, as a chaplain. So it is rank, but without command authority. And I think with Daniel, what we get is a picture of him having that kind of interaction. He's a very powerful and influential man, and he uses that to influence the people that are around him. So what we look at here in chapter 10 is this next vision, or this final series of visions that Daniel is going to see in chapter 10 is going to set that up. So in 10 verse 1, in the third year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a message was revealed to Daniel, who was named Belshazzar, and the message was true and one of great conflict. But he understood the message and had understanding of the vision. All right, so this is a little different from the other visions. In particular, he says, I understood this one. Was that true about the other visions? Absolutely not. I mean, he was very befuddled by the visions that he's had previously. So this is a very different series of visions. And so a part of this introductory chapter is to kind of help us understand that Daniel has been, I think, growing in his understanding of these messages as he's gone along. As he is getting new context, as he's getting the new information about all of this stuff, it is becoming something that is more familiar to him, and with that has greater understanding. Okay? That's a great way to look at our understanding of the Bible, right? When I was first really introduced to the Bible, I read certain passages, and I had kind of this, surface understanding of the Old Testament influencing what was in the New Testament. That we put these things away, but this was the completion of that. So all those things, like in concept, I guess I had a little vague idea, but over years of studying it, I have understood the Old Testament so much better, and with that, I have understood the New Testament better, and vice versa. Every time I go back to the Word, I learn a little bit more, and so it is with that growing understanding, I think, that Daniel is arriving at this point. He understands what's happening a little better. The message, though, is two things. It is both true and of great conflict. So, what God is revealing to Daniel in these next series of visions is that there's going to be a lot of conflict for his people specifically. The Hebrew people, the Jewish people, are going to have lots of conflict, and they do. They're going to be in conflict. We can think about the years that were conquered by the Babylonians, who are then conquered by the Persians. So in essence, they take control of them. They're conquered by the Greeks. They're conquered by the Romans. So they have all of these conflicts that end up in them being widely dispersed. But we can jump into more modern times, and we look at what happened to the Jews in World War II. They were selected, singled out specifically because of who they were, and 1.5 million people was what I think you said, Lewis?
Kids.
1.5 million kids, right? And I thought when I was doing this chapter today, I was thinking about your talk, Lewis, about how that impacted you, and I just they have had conflict that has lasted, and some of this vision I think has to do with the conflicts that God knew was coming for them. And I hate that, but it is part of the vision, and it is a true vision, and it has proven itself to be accurate. In verse 2, then he goes on, he says, "In those days I, Daniel, had been in mourning for 3 weeks." It doesn't tell us why he's in mourning. Here's a guess. Daniel is going to be concerned. Well, we lead at the end of chapter 10. We're concerned, chapter 9, coming into 10. Daniel had received his vision, and he had an understanding that his people would be able to return back to their homeland. Right? They're going to go back to Jerusalem. And if we jump to this third year of King Cyrus, they should have already made their initial return back home. And we can go back to Ezra and find that they did in fact have a great deal of conflict as soon as they got back. So it seems very likely that what Daniel is doing here, since we're also going to find out he's still in Persia, since he's still there, he's concerned about his people that have gone home and now run into this conflict. It doesn't ever specifically tell us why he's in mourning, but that's what we know is going on in his world. So it would seem likely that this is something that's on his mind. So in verse 3 he says, "I did not eat any tasty food, or did meat or wine enter my mouth, nor did I use any ointment at all until the entire 3 weeks were completed." So sometimes we think of fasting as eating nothing, and there are other fasts that we can practice. And so one of the things that Daniel does regularly, it seems, is to have these types of fasts where he puts himself basically on a bread and water diet, so to speak. I mean, he's just eating very clean foods, and that's all he is partaking in. Okay? So on the 24th day of the first month, while I was at the bank of the great river. All right, you just said it was 3 weeks of fasting, and we're on the 24th day. Why would that be? Great commentary that I thought had probably is accurate about their understanding of this. The first 2 days of the first month were typically given over to celebrations, so they would have been feasting days. So it's likely that Daniel had observed the feasts as the beginning of the new year. It's just like us still today. We celebrate the coming of the new year. So they have celebrations on the first couple of days of the first month. He starts his fast, and he fasts for 21 days, and we're now on the 24th day. And God then sends him the message. And we find that he is on the banks of the Tigris River. I lifted my eyes and looked, and behold, there was a certain man dressed in linen, whose waist was girded with a belt of pure gold of Uphaz. His body was also like beryl, and his face had the appearance of lightning. His eyes were like furnace, flaming torches, and his arms and feet like gleaming polished bronze, and like the sound of his words, like the sound of a tumult. And you probably have some various words there at the end of that. I have tumult. Multitude. Yeah. All right, so description that we get here, very similar to what we run into in Revelation. All right, this is a very similar type of description. What do we have here? What is it? From the description, what do you see in your mind? His body, he was dressed in linen, his waist girded with pure gold. His body was also like beryl. Anybody know what that is? Chrysolite probably is what some of you have. Chrysolite?
This is topaz.
Topaz? Okay. So, kind of the best guess I could give you, besides this, the brightness of light, okay, and almost always when we run into these other than human beings, and I don't know exactly what this is myself, but the brightness of the light is something that we run into. So I would get you to think about Moses, when he would go into the tent of meeting and he would speak with God, and he'd come out, and the Shekinah glory of God, this visible light, was radiating from his face, right? Just from being in that tent in the presence of God was all it took for Moses to be reflecting that when he went out. So this being has been in the very presence of God, and so light is one of the things. The beryl or the topaz or chrysolite, it is some kind of translucent material. Typically, as we're looking at it, it's something that has the ability to let light pass through it, but it's not like a clear light. So there's it's saying that you could tell that there was a body there, but that it actually had this light that was shining through it or emanating from it, and then we know that its face is just incredibly bright light. It doesn't specify about this first appearance, what we have here. So some say it's just one of the angels, because sometimes the angels show up and we've got this radiant glory that comes from them. But it's also a little more like Jesus as he appears in Revelation. And so it may be that this is what the fancy word is theophany. It means that it's an appearance of God. And so there may be some representation here of God. I'm not opposed to that. I'm fine with that. Or it's at least some angelic being that has been in God's presence. And that's clearly the description that we're getting. It's making you try to understand that this thing shows up and it's not something you've ever seen before. It's this amazing creature, God maybe himself. Now I, Daniel, verse 7, alone saw the vision, while the men who were with me did not see the vision. Nevertheless, a great dread fell on them, and they ran away and hid themselves. Love that verse, right? This thing shows up, they can't see it, but they know they don't want to be a part of it. Whatever it is, it's not mine. So they run off and hide. And all I can gather from this is that the very presence of God has shown up. And whether that's in the form of an angelic being or God himself, these folks can't comprehend it. They just don't have the spiritual enlightenment that Daniel has. And so what do? They turn tail and run because it just terrifies them. All they can feel is this ominous presence. And so they run away. So Daniel is left alone. But even though he was able to see the vision and he doesn't run away, he says in verse 8, "So I was left alone and saw this great vision, yet no strength was left in me. For my natural color turned in a deathly pallor, and I retained no strength. But I heard the sound of his words, and as soon as I heard the sound of his words, I fell into a deep sleep on my face, with my face to the ground." Okay, I don't think he fell asleep. I think he fainted. I think it's kind of a nice way of saying fell asleep. We have a better term for that. It just overwhelmed him, and he faints, and straight forward, just right down on the ground he goes. And, it's that feeling of the blood. If you've ever had it, it's a miserable sort of a feeling when you feel the blood just feels like it just drains out of your body, and you do lose your strength, and he just, down he goes. So, Daniel didn't run off, but he does faint at this. And it says then in verse 10, that a hand touched me and set me trembling on my hands and knees. So, our translations, what are the other versions out there? How do they translate that? You have a NIV, Jay?
Yeah, but it says the same.
Same thing? Okay. So, it's a difficult phrase to translate. And it says, set me trembling on my knees. It's more like he shook him awake. Right? So, he's shaking him awake, but still is weak. And so, this hand reaches out and touches him, and he doesn't say whose hand. It just, again, we have one of these beings that God is sending with a vision that reaches out and touches Daniel and helps him up, basically. And he said to me, "O Daniel, man of high esteem, understand the words I am about to tell you and stand upright, for I have been sent to you." And when he had spoken this word to me, I stood up trembling. All right, so poor Daniel, he's been through some pretty serious hardcore visions already, and he gets to this point. He's got another visitor. This one helps him sit up, tells him, "You need to stand up because you need to see this vision that's about to be given to you." Right? And so Daniel gets up, but barely, and is standing upright. Now, catch in the middle of that, Daniel, man of high esteem. God thinks very well of Daniel. Is Daniel a sinner? Yes. All of us are sinners. But there are some of us, I think, that are better than others. And Daniel has clearly proven himself to be someone who is, he's been blessed by God. This is true. But he has also devoted himself so deeply to God. Again, I take you back to the very beginning of the story of Daniel. A young man who's carried off and specifically put into a training regimen to learn how to be a Babylonian. That was his schooling, to learn how they spoke, to learn how they wrote, to learn all of their customs, all of those things. That was what he did for the first 3 years of his time there. But he doesn't divert from his belief and his faith in God and stays very close to the religious practice as best he could in the place that he was. Right? So Daniel remains faithful to God, and I think that's why we have this word about his character from God. Daniel, man who is highly esteemed. Wouldn't that be great for God to come and say that to you? I just think God is giving him something pretty special. He's an older man at this point. He's probably in his 70s. And he's devoted his whole life to serving God. In verse 12, he then said, "Do not be afraid, Daniel, from the first day that you set your heart on understanding this and on humbling yourself before your God, your words were heard, and I have come in response to your words." So I think that is in response to his fasting and praying. Okay, so Daniel had been spending that 21 days fasting, and mourning over his people. That would have included prayers and special concerns. And so God is about to reveal to him what is going to happen. And it's, like we read in the first few verses there, it's not great things, but God's there with him. Okay? And so he says, I've heard your words. I've heard you from the very first day that you started praying about it. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia was withstanding me for 21 days. Exactly the length of Daniel's fasting. Then behold, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I had been left there with the kings of Persia. Now I have come to give you an understanding of what will happen to your people in the later days, for the vision pertains to the days yet future. Okay, I think this is an opportunity for us to get just a tiny glimpse into some of the stuff that goes on that we don't see and often don't think about. Paul tells us in Ephesians that we need to put on the full armor of God. And what does he cite as the reason for that?
To withstand the wiles of the devil.
Okay, it stands a while against the devil because our fight is what?
Not against flesh and blood.
It's not against flesh and blood. But
it's spiritual darkness.
Spiritual powers, principality, these hidden things from us, right? So, we don't ever get a name for the person that's, the being that's there with Daniel. He says, I was withheld from you for that 21 days, but then Michael came and helped him. Now, there is massive amounts of divergent literature written about exactly what is going on here. And I think you probably can gather for what reasons. Some have contended that there was an angelic force that was fighting against a human force and all this kind of stuff. Rather, what I think, because of what we witness, what we see, is this. I think that this angel is saying that I've been fighting that fight with the prince who was under attack. In the sense that demons, fallen angels, whatever those things that we fight against, all of those principalities that Paul talks about, they were trying to influence this Persian prince. And so whoever this was, his job was to try to influence him for the good. I'm not exactly sure how that all takes place, how that battle is happening around him. But we run into several places in Old Testament and New Testament where we talk about guardian angels that are watching over peoples. I don't know that we see anything that it says that there's guardian angels specifically appointed over us individually. Jim had a great lesson about angels for several weeks. We talked a lot about some of those different kinds of things. But I definitely think what you have here is a moment when this divine being is saying, I heard your prayers, I wanted to respond to you, God favors you greatly, but this was too important for me to leave, and I needed to be fighting that battle, and I basically got relieved. Michael, this great angel, shows up and says, I'm going to take over for you and let you go on about your other business. I was telling JJ that as we were driving over here, I said, tonight's lesson makes me think about Frank Peretti's book, Piercing the Darkness, and this Present Darkness and Piercing the Darkness. I don't know if you've ever read those books. He has a take on the fight that goes on between angels and demons and about how they influence us. It's fictional literature, so don't hear me saying that it's an accurate account, okay? But it's get you to think about what is happening that sometimes our eyes just don't see. Just like the prophets of old, when their eyes were opened and all of a sudden they saw the great host that was there to fight alongside them, right? And, they think they're lost, and then the eyes are open, all of a sudden they can see there is this great angelic host that's right there to fight alongside with you. Now, did they actually draw swords and fight? No. They were there, and they work in whatever way they do to support us and to encourage us. We'll come back to it, but Jesus was in the garden, and he prays 3 times. Where did he receive comfort from? Angels. Angels came and ministered to him. that night. So, all I can say is take the words at the end of the letter to the Hebrews carefully. Offer hospitality to strangers. For some of you have entertained angels unaware. So, God tells us many times that His forces for good are there amongst us, working for us. And the converse of that is also true. There was a vigorous battle being fought. And so it was something that was very important enough that even though Daniel was highly esteemed, this being needed to stay there and give support.
Do you think there are angels among us right now
Absolutely.
in the auditorium?
I mean, in whatever way we talk about it. I mean, sometimes we just don't have the vision to see it, and so they're present, but absolutely.
Has your dog ever seen anything that you didn't see?
Mm-hmm. Bender, do you understand what Tim's talking about? That all of a sudden you'll have a dog and they'll stop and they clearly have their eyes fixed on something, and you're kind of looking, trying to figure out what it is that they see. Sometimes we just don't have the vision to see that those things are around us. Now, I also, again, come back to the idea that just as much as those angels are there, I think the forces of darkness that are trying to lead us away are also present and trying to lead us astray. Okay? All right, so let's go back to the verses. He was with the prince of the kingdom of Persia, and so I often think that what we're talking about in these battles they're bigger battles. They're trying to win our whole beings. And he has now come to give you understanding, verse 14, of what will happen to your people in the later days. The vision pertains to the future. So, again, this has become very clear. It's real specific that the vision you're about to see, and Daniel's already had these visions, right, leading up to this, that have gotten to this point where he understands that these things are about his people. Verse 15, and when he had spoken to me according to these words, I turned my face toward the ground and became speechless. And behold, one who resembles a human being was touching my lips. Then I opened my mouth and spoke, and said to him who was standing there before me, O my Lord, as a result of the vision, anguish has come upon me, and I have retained no strength. For now can such a servant of my Lord talk with such as my Lord? As for me, there remains just now no strength in me, nor has any breath been left in me. Okay, so Daniel again starts to become weak. This one now looks like a human being, but he says looks like. Not, but it looks like a human being. Reaches out, touches him, helps him up. And let's kind of sort out the Lord's going on here. He says, Oh my Lord, as a result of my vision. Now, speaks to the thing that looks like a human in front of him. Calls him Lord. Probably little L is appropriate here. Remember that this is a world where Daniel lived in. The kind of speech would have been formal, right? So, lords were common. How can such a servant of my Lord? Okay, so Daniel recognizes that the person he is speaking to him, he says to him, Lord, but also recognizes that this being is a servant of his Lord. Okay, so what we do know about angels is that they are those messengers or servants to God, and that Daniel recognizes this now as he's had these visions, right? So he's basically saying is that something as great and holy as you, because this being stands in the presence of God, therefore it is also holy. And he says, how can you speak to me? You are a servant of my Lord. And Daniel's having a hard time making that logical leap from this incredible being wanting to serve him. And that's exactly what it's doing. Someone that serves God Almighty, and yet you would be willing to serve me. Wow. Okay. So, I'm going to wrap this up here in these last few verses. All right. So, He is strengthened a second time. Then this one, with human appearance, touched me again and strengthened me. So he helps him up and said, O man of high esteem, so again recognizing Daniel's place, do not be afraid, peace be with you, and take courage and be courageous. Now, as soon as he spoke to me, I received strength, and I said, may my Lord speak, for you have strengthened me. Then he said, do you understand why I come to you? But I shall now return to fight against the prince of Persia. So I am going forth, and behold, the prince of Greece is about to come. However, I will tell you that what is inscribed in the writing of truth, yet there is no one who stands firmly with me against these forces except Michael, your prince. Okay, so the wrap-up here is he's strengthened. He asks him again, do you understand it? Daniel has admitted that he's starting to understand these things. He asks him, you need to understand these things again, and you're going to see the visions of things that are about to happen, because I need to go back to doing my work. And so initially the battle for the Jews is going to be with the Persians. Of course, that's exactly true. They do get restored during this time, but there is still strife. That, after the Persians, is going to be the Greeks. They're going to be coming. That's the next conflict that you will have. And yet there's still forces that stand. And then, so I think it's this picture of ongoing, enduring conflict that they're going to face. And I think specifically he's talking to Daniel and his people. So he's talking about the Jews and what's going to happen to them. So the next 2 chapters are going to be the visions that this chapter has led up to. And it has prepared Daniel for what he's about to see. So Daniel's now been strengthened, and if you go back, you can see it was 3 different times. There's 3 strengthenings of Daniel in that chapter to get him ready to go into this series of visions. In the previous visions, when Daniel didn't understand, it left him just sick, literally sick, it says at the end of chapter 8. So sometimes this is too much, but now Daniel has been, he's been prepared, both by his own preparations, the fasting and prayer, and by the visitor. All right, so that sets us up for the next couple of weeks, the next couple of chapters, and it kind of leaves you like, and next week we will, but that's where we're at with that, and that uses up our time. I love this chapter because of some of the things that are not specific to what's going on, but the little things that are kind of just in the background. A little glimpse into what's happening in the heavenly realms in our world, and how God is working in that. I love that about this chapter. There's been way too much time studying it, but anyway. So if you would, any questions before I know. Everybody's ready to go. I was too long anyway, so everybody's like, no, don't ask questions. So, all right, if you would, join me in prayer. Father God, I do thank you for your blessings. I thank you for an opportunity to study from your word. I pray, Father, that we will be aware of the angels around us, your presence around us, the work that we can't see that's going on in our lives and the people around us. Father, I thank you for having a family of brothers and sisters in Christ that we find strength from and can be encouraged through. I pray, Father, that I will do that as well. Father, we thank you for your love, for your forgiveness. I pray this in Jesus' holy name.